25 Most Terrifying Maniacs and Murderers in Human History. We are starting a series of publications about the most frightening and dark serial killers in human history. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next episode. The House Where Water Smelled of Smoke. The Story of Dennis Nilsen. Prologue. The duty shift at a blocked drain. London is good at hiding things. Dampness disappears under eggshell paint. Loneliness hides behind pub neon and the hum of cheap radios. But on a February evening in 1983, there was nothing left to hide at 23 Cranley Gardens. Water rose back through the pipes as if the city itself wanted to return something it had swallowed. A drain engineer lifted the inspection cover in the courtyard and stared into a slurry where he saw what shouldn't be in a pipe. Grey-pink fibers, like shreds of meat. Tiny pieces too neatly and deliberately cut. "This can't be," he muttered, and called the police. Hours later, Detective Inspector Peter J. stood at the third-floor landing and rang the bell. The door opened on a polite, tidy man who said, "You must be here about the drains." He reached for his coat, his keys. The hallway already told on him, that cloying, faintly phenolic taint that never belongs in a home. The countdown began for a story London had avoided noticing for 5 years. The man's name was Dennis Andrew Nilsen. Part 1. Northern Childhood. Water takes the living and brings the dead back. Northeast Scotland. Fraserburgh. Wind that sands down faces. A sea that keeps those who dawdle. Dennis was born 23 November 1945 in a country exhaling after war. A Norwegian father, a soldier, more rumor than presence. A young, strict mother with the scratch marks of labor on her hands. A grandmother like a quiet hearth. Above all of them, a grandfather the size of a lighthouse. Grandfather went to sea and returned the way good sentences end, with a full stop. Until the day the stop didn't come. They found him dead aboard, and winter silence moved into the house. Dennis was 6. They led him to say goodbye, not with tea in the kitchen, but to the coffin itself. The old man lay beached and enormous. His face was tidied into stillness. The boy couldn't yet speak the language of death, but he absorbed its grammar. A body that cannot leave will never abandon you. A body is presence guaranteed. Water marks the border between yesterday and never. The house split along the father line. Divorce. Moves. School where he was the quiet one, neat and miniature, apologizing with every breath. Loneliness is not loud at first. Inside him, though, 2 rusty plates began to grind. The fear of being left and the hunger for the unmoving. Puberty arrived like a northern bear, slow, suspicious, and best kept out of sight. What he wanted wasn't what people said you should want, and not in the way you should want it. It was easier to disappear into himself than to confess to the world. Part 2. Army kitchens, foreign towns, and the silence of state corridors. Adolescence for Dennis was an attempt to become someone who could speak for him. He joined the army, the catering calls. Everything there made sense. Instructions, knives honed to regulation, human contact portioned out like rations. He liked the barracks kitchens, big steel lungs, heat, breath of kettles. In a perverse symmetry, kitchens rhymed with mortuaries, metal, vapors, temperatures, a body becoming orderly matter. He served in Germany and the Middle East, learning to be precise, discreet, disciplined. Learning not to attach. After discharge, he tried policing. Conscientious, but not quite one of us, and left. Then came the civil service, employment offices with the word K written on the walls and the smell of paper dust in the corridors. He settled in London. At 195 Melrose Avenue, he had tired furniture, a carpet, cheap books, a radio, and the notion that life could be made to resemble life. It couldn't. Part 3. Cohabitation and the crack that let others in before the killings. There was an attempt at normality, A domestic arrangement that, on good evenings, looked almost like family. It ended. The old story, goodbye again. Dennis was left in a room where a single cup on a table performed a petty test of presence. One cup is childhood. Late 1970s, London's gay scene was woven of light and shadow, discos and doorways, pubs where you could be yourself, streets where you could be punished for it. The bravado of nighttime freedom lived beside the fear of public shaming. Predators flourished in that gap. Dennis lived there too, frightened of his desire, craving the impossible, that the boys he brought home might somehow stay forever. In December 1978, fear and desire signed a lease together. Part 4. Melrose 195. When walls begin to breathe. The first death, Stephen Dean Holmes, 14. London saw in the new year with cheap fizz and bad singing. In a pub, a boy, too young to be invisible. He was tired and wanted warmth and a place to sleep. Dennis took him home. The night was gentle. Drink, talk, a bit of music. Morning meant leaving, and in that single motion lay the catastrophe. Like a man grabbing a collapsing curtain, Dennis reached for the boy's throat. Life ebbed quietly, not because the killer was strong, but because the child was defenseless. Then came the bath. Water closed over a face that, the evening before, had asked for water to wash. Was Dennis shocked? Perhaps. More likely, he was even, as if for the first time things had gone right. He kept the body near. He talked to it. He sat together with it and listened to records. Loneliness, at last, receded. But death has an odor and neighbors have noses. He stowed the remains beneath the floorboards. Later he moved them to the garden where he burned them on small fires. The ritual was grotesquely domestic. His dinner sizzling in one pan, sweet, fatty smoke from forbidden fuel curling upward in the yard. London did not hear. Then the others. 1979 was the mood of continuing in silence. Kenneth O'Kendon, 23. A Canadian student. They met in town. A tour of London promised. At Dennis's flat, a headphone cord looped around a throat while the kettle simmered. Dennis discovered he could stare at stillness the way some people stare at icons. Martin Duffy, 16, a runaway, hungry, underslept, London a snare. He was offered food, a blanket, then sedation, and was deprived of breath while unconscious. William Billy Sutherland, 26, homeless, quick with a smile, disappeared quietly, missed by no one except the man who had learned to need the unmoving. Malcolm Barlow, 24, a sting of fate. He'd suffered a medical episode and slumped outside the building. Dennis called an ambulance, helped, became a savior. Next day, Barlow returned to say thank you, and stayed forever. Bodies lived in the house like Rome furniture, under the floor, in the recesses of cupboards. Sometimes Dennis sat beside them, set a record going, and talked, as if death made people finally available. In the garden the fires burned. Neighbors tasted a sweetness and fat in the air. But in a city of coal smoke and poverty, odd smells are part of the wallpaper. By early 1981, the space under the floor at Melrose Avenue had a fullness you could feel with the soles of your feet. Complaints mounted about the smell. The landlady fretted over money. Dennis moved. Part 5. 23 Cranley Gardens. The upstairs flat with no floor and no yard. No crawl space here. No private garden. A third-floor flat with a single shared soil stack. A thin throat that accepts only what's small. Dennis became more meticulous. He kept bringing young men home, often drifters, sometimes boys who had missed the last bus. The method held: drink, sedatives, garroting, sometimes the bath. Increasingly he had to dismember. Storage options were gone. Parts ended up in rubbish sacks, a drawer, a tea chest, even a cooking pot, and down the pipe. Among the late victims, John Howlett, about 23, who fought hard. The struggle left marks on Dennis's hands and a memory. That resistance gave him, perversely, a feeling of fusion. Graham Allen, 27, who accepted food. The evening ended as usual. Stephen Sinclair, 20, thin and raw, the last. His death would be that excess drop in an already brimming sink. Part 6. How Water Told Everything. The Arrest. On 8 to 9 February 1983, tenants at Cranley Gardens reported a blockage. Dino Rudd sent a man, Michael Cattram, spade, torch, lid. In the slurry he found what no kitchen produces: sheaves of human tissue and soft cartilage. He knew market smells. He knew this wasn't them. The police understood quickly: human remains. Inspector Peter J. and colleagues climbed to Nilsen's flat. It was clean, indifferent, books on music and dogs. In the cupboard, Dennis said evenly, as if pointing out a stack of towels. He confessed at once, without bargaining, 15 or 16. I didn't really keep count. The confession sounded like a diary entry. No sobs, no growls, just order. He calmly took detectives to Melrose Avenue, indicated where he'd burned bones, sketched room plans, helped assemble his own case like a puzzle. For a while London had joked about odd smells up north of the river. The laughter stopped. Part 7. The victims, names, ages, shadows. Justice begins when the dead have names. In Nilsen's case, too many never did. Detectives and pathologists worked heroically, but London's night is a treacherous archivist. Below is the list the case could nail to the material world. There were likely more. Stephen Dean Holmes, 14, 31st December 1978, Melrose Avenue, New Year's pub encounter. Kenneth O'Kendon, 23, late 1979, Melrose Avenue, Canadian student. Martin Duffy, 16, 1980, Melrose Avenue, teenage runaway. William Billy Sutherland, 26, 1980, Melrose Avenue, homeless. Malcolm Barlow, 24, 1981, Melrose Avenue, returned to thank Nilsen. Unidentified male, C 20 to 30, 1981, Melrose Avenue. Unidentified male, C 20 to 30, 1981, Melrose Avenue. John Howlett, about 23, 1982, Cranley Gardens. Graham Allen, 27, 1982, Cranley Gardens. Stephen Sinclair, 20, January 1983, Cranley Gardens. Dennis spoke of a dozen to 15 and sometimes more. The court proved fewer, not because the others didn't exist, but because justice asks for proof beyond reasonable doubt, and Moorgate fog doesn't keep its receipts. Those who survived, too often under-acknowledged. Carl Stottor, about 21, attacked in 1982. Nilsen reversed course mid-crime, warmed him, gave him tea, and let him go. Stottor later testified. Andrew Ho, a Hong Kong student who reported an attempted strangulation. Police response was tepid, freighted with homophobic undertone. Douglas Stewart fought off an attack and escaped. Again, the system didn't lock in the warning. Paul Nobbs survived a violent night at Melrose Avenue. His later testimony helped sketch Nilsen's pattern. Their names matter because they form the hinge on which prevention might have swung. Part 8. The Investigation. A cabinet room reconstruction of hell. Under arrest, Nilsen was courteous, cooperative, almost pedantic. He remembered music played after each departure, drinks poured, throwaway phrases spoken the night before. He remembered not blood. He disliked blood, but quiet. I wanted them to stay. At Melrose Avenue, diggers found charred bone fragments, teeth, rings, buttons. At Cranley Gardens, officers catalogued sacks, pans, a tea chest, cupboards holding things that had once had pulse. It was not the lair of a butcher, too tidy. It was the office of a man administering death. Detectives came to see two worlds. The world of holding, leaving men in place, then keeping their bodies, and the world of cleansing, fire, water, pipe. Both were controlled, administered, like an army kitchen. He had a dog, Bleep, who padded through those rooms like a living rebuke to the silence. After the arrest, the dog was put down. It gutted him, which is not a plea for sympathy, only a map of his remaining attachments. Part 9. Psychological profile. An embrace that never loosens. It is easy to spit monster, close the file, and go to lunch. Nilsen is more complicated. Key notes. Early bereavement, grandfather's death as the first massive leaving, coupled with a cooled emotional climate at home. Shamed, isolated sexuality in a still stigmatizing era. An intense need for closeness shackled to fear of exposure. Compulsion to hold. He described the peace stillness gave him. They can't leave. Less classic necrophilic gore, more fixation on absent will. Alcohol as solvent of inhibition. Control rituals. The kitchen's logic. Boil, portion, store, clean, build into home life. Dissociation and narcissistic defenses. The inventory tone in interviews. Not gloating, not weeping. Administering. Fantasy of domesticity. Post-mortem companionship. Films, music, remarks delivered into rooms of one. His crude repair job on childhood. Risk factors across the lifeline. Sudden childhood exposure to death, sacralizing stillness. Social isolation, stigma, the impossibility of open, healthy gay life in his formative years. Work that rewards routine and control, misapplied at home. Rationalization of harm as a twisted form of care. I only wanted them not to leave. Predatory opportunity in a big city, vulnerable young men, especially homeless and new to town. Ready access to alcohol and sedatives. None of these alone creates a killer. Millions carry similar scars and never cross a line. But in one mind, hungry for control, terrified of abandonment, the combination formed what we call Nilsen. Part 10. Police and court failures. How a city failed its uncounted. Cities are machines of attention. In the late 1970s and early 80s, London's machine misfired in several ways. Victim invisibility. Many targets were homeless, runaways, or visitors. Their disappearances rarely triggered full-tilt investigations. Nilsen specifically hunted the unmissed. Homophobic undertow. Survivors feared reporting. When they did, the reception could be mocking or merely disinterested. Assaults were slotted as too drunk to recall, not as alarms in a pattern. Fragmented missing persons work. No unified database, weak cross-borough coordination. Strangenesses stayed in little piles of paper rather than forming a pattern. Gossip instead of censors. Odors, odd garden fires. Neighbors' complaints at Melrose were dismissed as domestic trivia. The landlady didn't escalate. Tenants didn't insist. There were no standard triggers for "this is wrong." Evidentiary limits at trial. In 1983, the court could convict on 6 murders and 2 attempts, rightly demanding proof beyond reasonable doubt. Ethical procedure, tragic scope. Families of unproven victims remained unrecognized. Public health blind spots. Ironically, it was a blocked drain and a competent engineer that broke the case. There were no other systemic tripwires, no way to correlate a lot of bonfires in that yard. With missing young men, no training to treat strange smells as potential forensic signals. The Met would later reform parts of its missing persons practice, especially around vulnerable adults and LGBTQ+ victims. The tuition fee was ruinous. Part 11. Trial. Autumn 1983. Diminished responsibility as the last battlefield. At the Old Bailey, two dramas wrestled for the curtain call. The Crown painted a man who knew. He planned, concealed, disposed. He persisted when it suited him. The defense argued diminished responsibility, abnormality of mind under the Homicide Act, necrophilic fantasies, trauma, and isolation rendering him not evil so much as ill. Psychiatrists split. Diagnoses ranged from severe personality disorder to mixed states, marked by an emotional flatline, wearing a coach's face. The jury listened to Nilsen's even voice, inventory tone. For some, it proved cynicism and control, thus legal sanity. For others, it announced a cavern. Verdict: guilty of murder on 6 counts and guilty on 2 attempted murders. Life imprisonment, initially with a 25-year recommendation, later converted in effect to a whole life tariff. No romance followed. Prison, library, letters, legal tussles over his writings. Parts of his memoirs surfaced posthumously under the title History of a Drowning Boy, sparking fierce debate with families and campaigners about giving a platform to the killer's voice. On 12 May 2018, Dennis Nilsen died in custody. Complications after surgery for an aortic aneurysm at HMP Full Sutton's medical chain. A quiet end to a life that was too loud for those who survived him. Part 12. Timeline to separate missed from dates. 23 Nov 1945. Born, Fraserburgh, Scotland. 1951 to 1952. Grandfather dies, first trauma of leaving. 1960s. British Army, Catering Corps, Germany, Middle East. Early 1970s. Brief policing stint, then civil service, employment officers. 1975 to 1978. Attempted cohabitation, breakup. 31st Dec 1978. Murder of Stephen Holmes. Series begins 195 Melrose Avenue. 1979 to 1981. Murders at Melrose, Ockendon, Duffy, Sutherland, Barlow, and others. Storage under floor, garden bonfires. 1981. Moved to 23 Cranley Gardens, 3rd floor. 1982 Jan 1983. Murders of Howlett, Allen, Sinclair. Attempted murders, Stottor et al. 8 to 9 Feb 1983. Human remains found in the drain, arrest. Autumn 1983. Old Bailey, life sentence, effectively whole life. 12 May 2018. Dies in prison. Part 13. Domestic topography of horror. Why it looked normal. London evil loves ordinary rooms. Carpet, vacuum cleaner, shoe brush by the door. Nilsen was pedantic. That's what makes it worse. He wasn't a trophy collector in the usual sense. His trophies were states. He collected quiet, stillness, the counterfeit homeliness of people who could no longer leave. Colleagues remember punctuality. Neighbors remember smells and a dog. The system remembers a bureaucrat who looked like a brochure for the system. Evil in the wrapper of a model clerk. No city has a shortage of that.
Part 14. The ethics of looking, how not to erase the erased. The trap in every serial killer story is remembering the face of the killer and forgetting the faces he destroyed. This telling tries to reverse that. When we speak Stephen Holmes, Kenneth Ockendon, Martin Duffy, Billy Sutherland, Malcolm Barlow, John Howlett, Graham Allen, Stephen Sinclair, we are returning presents for a second to those pulled out of it. Yes, the case never named them all. That doesn't make them no one. It means a city averted its gaze at the worst possible moment. The lesson is not the demonization of one man, but the calibration of everyone's attention. Part 15. Counterfactuals that still matter. If late 70s London had possessed better procedures for missing young men, especially the vulnerable, some of this might not have happened. If survivors' reports had been received with respect rather than sniggered away, the arrest might have come sooner. If landlords and tenants had had a standard pathway for escalating bad smells, unexplained bonfires, and domestic anomalies, the city might have converged earlier on Melrose. Hardest of all, if runaways had places they could return to without shame, and newcomers had safety nets, the hunter's pasture would have been smaller. This is an old case. Most of the ifs are not. Part 16. Water's last word. The water smelled of smoke, the engineer said. Two elements, mismarried, the thing that takes away and the thing that purifies. Nilsen wanted water to end his story, to rinse away the bare fact of those lives. Water did not end it, water spoke. If there's a moral here, it is not in the easy word monster, but in the more difficult word attention to those we don't see, to the oddities we'd rather excuse as that's just city life, to people silenced by shame. A city is not walls and pipes. A city is its willingness to stop and listen. Appendix A. Timeline cheat sheet childhood. Fraserburgh, grandfather's death, axis of loss holding. Youth, army cook, discipline, ritual, control. London, failed home life isolation. 195 Melrose Avenue, 1978-1981. First murders, storage, bonfires, neighbor complaints. 23 Cranley Gardens, 1981-1983. Continuation, dismemberment, attempted killings with escapes, Stottor, Hoe, Stewart, Nobbs. Last victim, Sinclair. Blockage arrest, drain police confession. Trial, sanity versus diminished responsibility life, whole life. 2018, death in custody. Aftermath, pressure to reform missing persons work, debates over giving killers a platform versus preserving victims' dignity. Appendix B, profile map, short, core, compulsion to hold, abandonment terror, stillness fetishized as ideal closeness. Moderators, alcohol, ritualized control, pre-portion clean, isolation, triggers, breakups, stigma, encounters with vulnerable men in the night city. Behavioral loop. Charm drinks, a date strangle drown, domestic scenes with the body conceal destroy lull repeat. Cognitions. I'm not cruel, I just don't want them to leave. I give them a home, affect flattened, bursts of rage, then quiet again. Epilogue. Names by heart. Let the last line be theirs, not his. Stephen Holmes, Kenneth Ockenden, Martin Duffy, Billy Sutherland, Malcolm Barlow, John Howlett, Graham Allen, Stephen Sinclair, and the ones London's night carried off without a tag. The story ended in a pipe, but it began much earlier, with a small boy led to a coffin to say goodbye. We cannot rewrite his memory. We can rewrite our practices. So next time, a city hears water a little sooner.